Hello there and welcome to day 15 of Weekend's Web App. We are good to get going, and if you would like to follow along, you'll just need to pull down the repo, and then when you pull down that repo you'll want to check out day 14 because that's where we finished. And then you'll find yourself at exactly the same state of code that we're in right now. I've already started up my server. I did that with Gulp. I'll just push this off into another window and we'll settle ourselves down back on app.ts, our root code, because we finished a larger block of work last time we were here. So if we take a look at the app, we found ourselves with a database that sort of works with some degree of querying. We could have spent more time on this, but I figured we'd end up down a rabbit hole where we'd probably end up sacrificing almost 10 or so days into just creating IndexedDB libraries. And I didn't want to end up in that position because otherwise we're just spending too long on one particular concept when the idea is to get to a finished product. That said, we will of course end up working with IndexedDB again once we deal with the app in proper, but I figured it was going to be prudent not to spend too much time on that. So at this point, we are going to be moving on to an internationalization, which is a large and important subject whenever you are working to build a web application. So there are two key terms in this: internationalization and localization. And these refer to two specific parts of the process. Internationalization is the process of making your application, game, software program, whatever it is, able to support more than one language. And what that means is, it means in a number of parts of your code, it allows us to inject the things that make this application specific to a particular language. And so internationalization is essentially preparing your application for the process of localization. So localization is where you take all of whatever the functions that you've put in your application, whether they're literal functions, APIs, whatever they are, you take them and then you create something that will allow it to look correct in another language. And what this typically means is during this localization process, you will be providing a new translation file, which says what every one of the words that is in your application, like for example, this string here, all of these need to be translated. And that's that's part of the process of localization. But it's not just strings, and it's not just these sorts of things, these numbers here, because you need to have a concept of pluralization, because not every language handles pluralization the same. So there's more logic to be had there. And then you get into the realm of dates and times and numeric formats, which again, there are local standards to this sort of thing. So eventually you need to cross the bridge and handle essentially these are the three main things that you handle in internationalization, which I mean is why if you look at the API, the INTL API, International API, that's the main things that it covers is date, time format, number format, and plural rules. Now, it doesn't actually have anything for handling strings or anything like that. So we will when we can, we will probably use this API directly. But due to its I don't know about young, but I mean it's not something I'm super familiar with, and it doesn't necessarily get us all the way there. So we can't entirely lean on these, and we'll mostly be leaning on libraries for getting a lot of our internationalization done. But that said, we will create our own aspect of the platform layer so that we can change things out as we need to. Anyway, getting back to the subject at hand. So internationalization is always our first step. You localize after you have created an internationalization system. And that internationalization system has to handle translation of strings, So all of the times where you talk to the user, all of those strings, they need to be handled in some way, shape, or form. So essentially, like it's some sort of function typically that allows you to feed in some sort of string, like say in your code it's English, like so this has a function or something like that that looks like this, and then that's meant to return the translated version. So if it was English, maybe it comes back as that, or if it was French, I don't know how to do that in French. Let's look it up on Google Translate, hey? How does that work in French, right? So if we were in some sort of French language mode, then we would end up coming back with that particular text. And that's sort of like, that's the real basic understanding of it, but we'll go into it deeper. The next part of this is dates and times. And typically in your application, you're going to have lots of different ways in which you communicate dates and times. And it's not so clear cut as long way and short way, because then sometimes you'll have some combination of relative date formats, which, for example, you might want it to be able to say, okay, yesterday, today, and then show the dates further on down that path. But this has to be translated. This yesterday string has to be translated. This today string has to be translated. And if it does show the date, for example, today's date, if you were to go by the ISO standard, would be that there, but most people don't read in the ISO standard. They think of things like 17th July 2018, or if you're American, for some reason you do the month first. I'm not entirely sure why, but there you go. That's what they do. There's all sorts of different ways that you can present dates and times. So your internationalization system has to allow for you to localize those dates and times. And finally, numeric formats, something often not really paid attention to or anything like that, but not everyone uses commas as decimal separators in precisely the same way. I don't know, I don't usually spend too much time on numeric, what's the word I'm trying to with numeric localization, but we will add that in. And we'll provide that with a library called numeral.js, which allows us to sort of do various sorts of formatting for our numerals and that kind of thing. Right. So anyway, it's time for us to start off with probably set up some sort of API so that we can do this. And you might have remembered last time we did this, we were working with a concept of a context, right? And the database exists within this context. Well, our language is probably going to have to be part of this context as well, because if we can think about, if we're going by usage case first, we look at the app state here, and we've got a database here and actions here. Well, translation, localization, like functions that hook into the internationalization system, all of that stuff is so going to be needed everywhere in your app. Like, there's just no getting around that fact, right? So our context is going to be the most sensible place to have some sort of API for this sort of thing. So I guess it makes sense to have some sort of maybe localized sort of context, and then you can do whatever you want with it. And we'll just make up a pretend API just for now. Oopsie-daisy. All right, so let's say we create an interface for localization, and we'll do that. And let's just say it has a translate function on it, which will accept a string and then return a string. And we'll make that our first sort of concept. And I might be a bit more express about this name. So we'll call it a localization context, let's say. Right. Now, if that's the case, we need to put some sort of localization context within this guy here, and I have a feeling this will catch up soon and realize that I'm doing the wrong thing, but maybe it won't. It doesn't catch up in the type system, so that's fine. Probably because the router isn't really asking for a particular context. Let me double check that. Oopsie daisy. What am I looking for? So when we initialize the router, okay, yeah, so it's a generic type, so it's pretty much cool with me putting in whatever. Well, I'm gonna have to make sure that I put in something else. So let's put in a localization function just for now, and we'll have a play with how we'd want to use this localization. Again, usage codes first, yeah. So let's say we have we'll put a function inside this object, and we'll just make something really quick and dirty just for now, because all I really want to start off with is a translate function that takes a string and returns a string. And in fact, we can make that a really shorthand function too. So let's just do that. The string returns a string, and I've got to give that function a string, and that should be enough. So now that's added localized to the context. So let's start using that on our home page, right? Now it's important to realize that obviously it's impossible for us to translate user-generated content on the fly. This is expressly for the application's content. So we're going to interpret that right now, even though it's not technically true, we're going to interpret that right now to mean that anything that is part of like entries, all the parts of the database are user-generated content. So what we're really talking about when it comes to things that are not user-generated content, we're talking about stuff like this link, this one here, this title here. All of these things are our app content, and they should be localized. So how will we do that? Well, hopefully we've got ourselves access to the context within inside the routes, and it doesn't look like we do. So we're going to have to handle that on the rendering side of things before we can really do anything. Yeah, we don't actually pass the context to the renderer. We're going to have to deal with that. So let's do just that. So we'll throw ourselves the context in there. We're going to have to add the context to the end of this one here as well, this initialize render call. And then we're going to make sure that in each of these routes, they expect to have some sort of context function within them, in their render function. So preload has got access to this context, but view render does not, and we need to. Oh no, it's got the concept of context. It's just an any type, and eventually we'll tighten up our type system to make that a little bit more controlled. But for now, we're fine leaving that be. Okay, we just need to pass it through then. So we've got our context here, and we've already passed it through. So now, if I just dump this stuff out of the way. Oh, that's right. Okay. So wherever we render, we need to add context to that. And we'll need to add it to any render. We'll need to add it to this render here. I think that is it. Okay. So now we can go back to app.ts and actually make use of our context. So again, we've got this app state, and it's depending on context, weekends, web app context being there as well. And in fact, I don't want to make use of it there. I want to play in the home view first. So let's do just that. Bring that up here. Drop that down. Okay. So if we're looking at this function here, we've got a range of things that should be translated. We've got this one here and these two here. So we can grab out of the context function, we can grab our translate. Because we do it so often, typically, and this is sort of, I mean, just more or less it's more or less just a convention, and I'm just going to assign this context.localize.translate to t underscore as sort of my translation object. And what we're going to do is, instead of putting this as the home page here, we're going to have the ability to go, all right, t, this is the home page. And while I could like make that literally the string, because I don't want to sort of, eventually I want to sort of scope these different translations. So maybe it's more like homepage.title. Yeah, let's talk about that, eh? So, and maybe we wanted to scope this one and go translate that to be about page page.title. So rather than in this app, like literally saying what the text says in the presentation side of things, we sort of divorce that concept and just sort of say, all right, the scope is the about page and it's the title of the about page. And maybe that changes down the track, but like, who cares? Like, the idea is that it should be easy to translate your application without having to worry about what it says in here. So we've got this Google link, like let's say we change that like homepage.google link, and then here we've got a slightly interesting thing, right? Because here we've got something like homepage.counter, and it's got to accept some arguments, doesn't it? It's got to accept a count. And we're going to do that just with that there. So let's say that's the way we wanted to do things. Now it doesn't like it because I haven't actually changed the type signature on it. So let's just do that real quick. App state is the one I'm after. So oh yeah, my bad. All right, this one. So we can accept anything here. So we can go. So say it accepts some sort of parameters. And this will become important down the track. I'll explain it in a little bit later. In fact, because we haven't actually translated all of this, because you can see here, while this is all user-generated content, it's actually interspersed with our own string. So again, this is something where translation sort of has to come to the fore. Potentially it looks something like, so translation, so let's say homepage.article line. And then in addition to that, you've got a title, which is article.title. And you've got the author name, which is author.fullname. Oopsie daisy. All right, and then we've got a publication date. And that's article.publication date. So hopefully you see what I'm doing here. I'm trying to gradually remove the amount of things that actually are... Have I got that right? Yes, I do. Okay. I'm trying to gradually remove the things that are actually specific to this, to the English language, and try and break it up so that it's really just, all right, here's all the things that you need to translate this particular chunk of content, right? So if we do that now, we'll end up with a bit of a mess. Can't access lexical declaration. Oh, right, I've turned it around. That's it. I made a boo-boo. Let's fix that up. Let's put that up there, and we should be good to go. So here we now have homepage.title up here, homepage.counter in here. We've got a bunch of article lines, but they're not actually sort of made clear what they are. And then we've got about page title at the bottom and homepage.google link at the bottom. You'll see we've got an errant, what's the word I'm looking for? We've got an errant curly brace there, so we need to get rid of that. It is gone. And now we have, I guess, a concept of how we would like to use this translation function. Okay, and this feels all right for me. There's one interesting case, which is this is a date. How do I know to localize it? And potentially I'll have to localize it again. So maybe there is an additional function here, like abbreviated date, or maybe it's more like, all right, you give it a date and then you say what kind of format you want, and you can pick from. So with these formats, you don't want to express about like where the days are or where the numbers are, but rather you want to have a collection of different types of formatting that each language can potentially target. So that way you can go, all right, I want a short date or I want a long date. And possibly a way to demonstrate this is if we go over to International, the International API here, we can look in date time format and you can sort of see what kind of API design they were going for here, where you've got this option of, let me stroll on down a bit to have a look at some of these examples. So you can see these basics one where it just goes, all right, I've got a date time formatter and I want you to just format it. Great, whatever. But then you've actually got some options for the formatting. And here it's like, okay, we want a long weekday, and then we want a numeric year and a long month and a numeric day. And then after that, the localization system does its thing to make it fit within that system. So it'll choose the ordering still. It'll choose where to put things. Now, I mean, this isn't, as I said, like, this can get mighty complicated real fast and potentially means that you have to do some work every time you bring in a new language. But we'll handle our least complex case first and then gradually go from there. So let's say, maybe in terms of an API design, rather than going for anything particularly complicated, we'll try to have a particular sort of, we'll have one for translating a string, and then we'll have one for formatting dates, and then we'll have one for formatting date times, and then maybe it has some arguments to go with it. For example, so it accepts a date string, and then you've got some options there, and like those options could be like abbreviation, full, with relative dates or something like that. Okay, but that said, though, I don't want to get into the weeds with date time just yet. I want to focus just on internationalization for this stream, and then we'll probably carry on to date time, because I mean dates are its own subject and quite a big one, really. So we probably don't want to dive too far into that one just yet. Okay. Anyway, we have a potential use example, but we do not have any code that makes use of this. And rather than just hacking away at this minimal case, we really need to talk about what is the thing that's going to make sense for this localization context. So it's probably about time for us to make a directory. So I'm going to jump into client, platform, and then localize. Because even though internationalization is a process, the code that we're calling is sort of like it's localizing something to turn it into code. So generally, I'm going to name everything in regards to localization, because that is the purpose that it's being called for, to localize a concept. Yes. So we're going to add that to our platform, and then we're going to have client, platform, localize, and then have index.ts. So I already know what I'm sort of going to do here. We're going to export a default class called localize context, and this is going to be the container for this. And to start off with, I'm going to say let's not worry about switching languages on the fly while the app is running. Because most people don't do that, because why would they do that? Because typically they just want to change the language once and then be done with it. So we're happy to sort of just like spin it down, spin it back up again anytime we want to change languages. and then we'll just address it from there. But that's not to say it's not going to be particularly it's not going to be particularly hard to do like an on the fly reboot of the localizer, because all we need to do is just re-render everything with a new context. That's really it. It's not a big deal. So anyway, when we create a localization context, the main thing that determines what we do is always going to be our region, our locale code. And I'll just maybe see if there's a good place where we can get the concept of locale codes from. Well, language code, that'll do. Yeah, language code. So language codes are an agreed upon set of codes, usually with only 2 letters in them, but often they are extended because like all the variants of English, for example. So yeah, we have a standard ISO 639, 6392 or 6391. Let's go to Wikipedia and have a look. So here we've got a whole list of language codes. And this probably doesn't cover it all, which is why, okay, 6392 is starting to come in. But that's fine. We can use 6391 for the most part. And the thing about this is, on top of this, let me see if I can find a good place for it. English. Yeah, so we've got English here, but we don't have all the subsets of localization, and that's I guess a kind of missing thing here. Let me see if I can find something that actually talks about that properly. Maybe I should have prepared this ahead of time, eh? But you're seeing the off-the-cuff language codes in US. That'll talk about it, won't it? Language localization. Okay, that'll do. All right. So here we've got these extensions like GB for Great Britain, US for American English, Canadian English, Indian English, Australian English, all that good stuff, right? So essentially, yeah, dialects that live within, or not dialects, but like things that are largely in the same family but have their slight idiosyncrasies, which does require a separate translation file to be properly handled. So typically, whenever you visit a page, when your browser talks to the web page, it talks about what language it's accepting. You can see here, accept language. Yeah, so you can see there that we've got some idea of, okay, so I want it to give us EN US and then EN, and that's just because I haven't changed this browser from default settings to like my language, right? So we could jump into our settings here and look down in our languages. So here we've got EN US on top. Let's say that we put in EN Australian. So we put English Australian up on top. We'll remove US because I'm not American. And then, even though I just said I'm not one thing, so I'm not going to add it there, how about we put, I'm doing a bunch of work for a German client lately, so how about I put German in there? Drop that down to the bottom, yeah? So that's going to give us these new languages, and I probably should have tested this just to make sure, but I think what we'll find is that if I shift reload this, and that might not have been updated, it may or may not be something that I have to restart the browser for it to actually start doing. Yeah, it might require that, but anyway, let's jump back over to that MDN page. So international MDN. Let's jump into the network tab. Oh yeah, here we go. So you can see here, accept language, EN, AU, EN. I'm not entirely sure what the Q 0.7 is. I'll have to look up that one. I don't usually play with that one too much. And then you've got the next language of DE, right? So our browser, when we request something, we say, hey, these are the languages that we're interested in. Which one can you give us first, right? And I guess that's just a matter of point, because even though you have this, typically sites will have prefixes. Like if we were to go to apple.com, all right, and you can see here, oh, choose another country, choose Australia, right? Well, for some reason, AU is like this, right? And what if I was to choose another place? For example, I was to go to India. Well, you can see again, we've got that prefix right there. And looks like they haven't translated for India. Let's see if we can find somewhere where they have translated. That's not helping me. All right. Let's see. Surely they have one for France, eh? There we go. Yeah. Oh yes, and they're all very proud that they've won the World Cup. Anyway, so you can see here we've got a translation, but all that translation is occurring within what they've determined the /fr place. And if we look around, pretty much all of it is done within the context of that. So even though I'm requesting a particular language in my headers, it's giving me it's giving me French because of that. Now with these language codes, in terms of the app, really what we'll have is some way to get whatever the local language is, and then we'll see if we can provide that, and then go from there. Now in this case, for this construction of a localized context, so let's get back to some code here. With this context, we will want a language code, and it'll be a string, and as a result of that, we will end up with our localized context. So if we were to, let's see, what am I doing here? Save that, and then go to app state. So here I want to go grab the localized context from .platform persistence from localize, and then that should be the thing that goes here. And we can get rid of that interface. Now it's going to break a few things here, because this doesn't seem like the right way to do it. Yeah, you can see how it doesn't like it there, because it doesn't actually have a translation method, right? So what we're going to need to do in addition to that is we're going to have to initialize our language down here. Alright, so I'll have to go grab a localized context. So we'll go import localized context from platform/localize. And then we'll create a new localization context down here. Yep, and we'll just start off with initialization as EN as our language context. It's not quite enough though, because we're still going to have an issue with this request for the translate function. So let's just get us over that particular hump by having translate here, where we take a string, which is going to be essentially a key, and then we'll just return key for now. So if we take a look at our app right now, that should still work, which it does. And in fact, what we can also do is, just to demonstrate that this will work, I am going to save the line code and return that line code. Now, this will actually break, and there's a reason for that. Because when you do this to a function, when you put a function and place it as its own variable,
you have sort of divorced it from the object it came from. And that's just a JavaScript weirdness thing, right? Or not really a JavaScript weirdness thing, it's just the way that their system works, right? But there is a way around this. You can do what's called binding. So if we were to take this translate function, we can turn that into this.translate.bind this. And this creates a version of that particular function that we can pass around. And this bind means that it will have access to this just like it's meant to. This is sort of a, like, as I said, it's an idiosyncrasy of the particular way that JavaScript has been built in terms of inheritance and that kind of thing. And I don't want to go into a massive thing about it because it's going to be a distraction, but that's a thing that you pretty much have to do whenever you want to pass around your function in isolation. And I guess it's an important thing to be clear, this would not be necessary if we were to do something like always call it directly. Like say we had a function like this. So we made our own function in here. This would work because we're never calling t we're never calling t divorced from the function, right? So hang on, I just got to put in the params. So we're never calling it separated, and you can see it works now, right? But if it's like this, where we actually pull that function off of it, then we must bind it, and that's what we're doing just here. Anyway, just a little bit about the weirdness, wonderful weirdness of JavaScript, and we will get back into things. Okay, so we have ourselves a function and it's returning the lang code. All very well and good, but that's not doing us any good. And it's at this point that we're going to introduce our first library called i18ext. However you want to pronounce it. I'm sure there's a bunch of different ways you could skin that cat. Anyway, i18ext is an internationalization framework, and it has a whole bunch of stuff that it can do for us, but we're not going to use much of it to start off with. Because realistically, what we want to do is we want to be able to take this translation file, like this key, and turn it into a string for us. That's all we want to do. So that's the hurdle that we're going to get over today. So I'm going to start off by adding i18ext to our code. And I will also add the types. Done. Right. So now that I've added that in, I should be able to import i18ext. And it might not like that. It doesn't have a default export, so I'm going to have to figure out a different way of doing it. I'm just going to jump into getting started and have a look at how it's supposed to look in terms of usage. So maybe I can just grab init from i18ext as init i18. Yeah, I'll do that because otherwise it'll just get confusing if I've just got it in it as a raw init. Okay. What we're going to do here, so we've got this concept of translation. The way it can be set up is it goes and gets the translation file and then lets you know when it's ready. We're going to avoid that just for now, just to avoid some complexity. And I'm going to sort of break my layers of localization just a wee bit by having it so that the localization files get passed in. So and that's going to be an any type right there, okay? So what do I mean by my localization file? So you can see here this concept of translation, okay? So that's sort of our resources. So we can just provide them the resources, and we're going to do that from a JSON file to sort of do our first little bit of translation. So let's have a poke around. Inside client, we're going to have a folder called locales. which is going to be essentially where all of our translation lives for the foreseeable future until I find a better place for them. Now, if we were to start off with our English translation, so JavaScript object notation, a JSON file is just that, okay? It looks like sort of our standard JavaScript. It's got a few extra rules on it, such as we can't have trailing commas and that kind of thing, and we have to be very specific about how we handle that. See, it doesn't like that trailing comma. I need to get rid of it. But other than that, it should be very familiar with the code that we've been writing. Anyway, let's put together a basic translation file for this and then see if we can make use of it. Where are we? I keep on jumping around and missing what I'm meant to be looking for. I feel like my page up, page down is going too far, but no, it's not actually. I'm just not paying attention. Okay. So here we can see all of those translation strings that we just made, and we're going to deal with each of them. So we're going to go homepage as a sort of a section, and then in it we're going to have the title. So it said something like, this is the homepage on it, right? And we've also got a, we'll do the counter last. So Google link is another one, and that's go to Google. Good stuff. What else have we got in there? We've got the article line. Okay, so here we start to introduce a little bit of complexity. So for i18next, the way it handles sort of these values right here is we should be able to get a hold of them. So we should be able to do something like this to get the title. And let's say we go back and do what that separator was. And then we've got author name. And then we've got the date here, and we won't bother translating that date yet. That's something we don't want to cross, a bridge that we don't want to cross just yet. Okay, so we've got title, article link, Google link. Good stuff. What else have we got? We've got the homepage counter. So that counter, and this is interesting because this is interesting, right? Because if you were to have a sentence like, you press the button X time, this is something that requires localization in a plural sense. Because if you have 0, then you need to add an S on the end of time. And if you have more than 1, you need to add an S on the end of time. And our language isn't alone. Some languages have many plural constructs that they need to deal with. More than 2 plural constructs. So you need to have some sort of functionality within the system that allows you to deal with that. And luckily, i18next has that. It wouldn't be much use for us without it. And you can see here we've got key and then key plural, which allows you to sort of handle those. And it's just that underscore plural that allows it to know where to look for it. And for example, Arabic, which has 5 plural forms, uses this here. So 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, and then 5 for the plural, right? So those 5 plural forms can be dealt with. But for this particular translation, all we need to do is we add plural on the end of it. And again, every time we're going to be using the number count here. And that should be enough for that one there. We need to handle the about page as well. So if we add another line here, so that's about page.title on there. So here, so that's a translation file, right? Now we need to get it into the system. So you might remember that we added this sort of argument for localization stores. Let's make use of it. So let me think where to pull this down. All right, I'll just, I'll import it up at the top. Okay, so we're going to import English translation from locales en.json. Cannot find module en.json. Have I not saved it? What you talking about, hey? It may not actually know what to do with JSON files yet. Yeah, let's have a look at our tsconfig. Give me one moment just to check out what I've done in another app that's set up much like this one, just so we're not wasting too much time. Unfortunately, I can't show this one to you. Is the nature of working for clients. They don't want you to share your stuff. All right. Well, I don't have JSX. Module resolution is node. ES 2016 is fine. I would have thought it would be fine. Yeah, JSON should work. So I'm not entirely sure why it's complaining that it can't find it. Because most definitely that is in there. Alright, I'm just going to keep on traveling on and see what happens if I just carry on, because it might just behave itself if I keep on going. And we're going to pop in here our localization resources. So we've got en as en translation. Well, code still runs, so maybe everything's all good. And I'll just have to deal with that type error at some later time. I don't want to have to deal with it right now. So we had that translation file. Let's bring up our localized context and just make sure that those resources are coming in. So good old console log never lets us down, eh? Good old rock. And let's see here. That looks like about it to me. So you can see all of that, but we're not actually making use of it yet. So let's do just that. Okay, so with this localized context, we need to make sure we're going to do it synchronously to start off with. And that's just because I don't want to have to, I don't want to have to mess around with sort of delaying for the I-18 setup. But I mean, it's not that big a deal. I could, we could do an initialize on that one as well before we initialize everything else. Yeah, what the hell? Let's do that just for now. We'll give it a delay, even though we don't really want to do that down the track because we're already providing it the translation resource, and we'll probably handle that in the future as well. Okay. So this init function, you can see that potentially here. This is what we want to do. We want to get back to, if we go back to getting started, just to have the real simple case here, you can see what the language is, what the resources is, and then down here, that's where it returns the translation function. All right, that should be sufficient. So let's get it done, I guess. So we need to initialize i18x, or init i18x, and we need to provide it with our language, which is going to be our lang code. We need to provide it our resources, which is going to be the localization stores. And we need to provide it our, we'll put debug is true, just to see what that means. It'll probably throw some errors if we land on keys that aren't meant to be there. You can see all these functions that it's got here. Yeah, we don't need to play with that too much. And in fact, I would really like it if that would return some sort of context. Okay, so what is I18 there? So we're going to create a private version of I18N. We'll do it like that. And I just need to know the type of that one. So I'm just going to check in types. I18x index.ts. So what is the thing that we get back from init? Oh, that's nice. Init immediate is a nice one. Yeah, set it to false if your backend loads resources sync. That way, so calling I after init is possible without relying on the init callback. Yes. So what we'll do is we'll init immediate as false, just to get sort of that behavior. And then other than that, we've got this interface for I18N, and that returns I18N. Okay. It's unfortunate, really, because that's such a common common sort of thing that it's gonna crop up everywhere. It's sort of a type that could end up being annoying. But anyway, so that's the type that comes back. This .I18 next. Once that's done, then it will have a translation function. So this .I18x.t or t, or does it have translate as well? Maybe not. But definitely the t function is what allows you to translate, right? So it expects 1 to 2 arguments but got 0. Well, how about we just change this? So it's return this .I18x.t, the key, and the parameters. Because that's the translation function right there. And this is potentially everything we need to end up with translation occurring in the right spot. Let's see what happens. And in fact, yeah, so we bind translate, and that's all good during that initiation. And should see how this goes. Okay. Well, certain things did not work. Certain things did work. We've got press the button 0 times. Let's see what happens when we increment it up. So you can notice that pluralization just there. That was very handy. Okay, but we're missing one piece of data, this article line. And let's see why that is, because potentially I just made the key wrong. If you'll notice here, that's handy, that it's got this little console log out, that missing key in translation homepage article. Honestly, I prefer it to actually show up on the app, but if we're always going to make a habit of doing these kinds of strings, it'll be pretty evident that when we've made a mistake. So let's just jump into that en.json file and see what we missed. Article link. Yes, not article line. So if we fix that, hopefully it's done its thing, and now we have our translated line here. Okay, and about page, go to Google, also the same. All right, but we've still got some certain things missing. So how about we take this opportunity to go through the remainder of the app and deal with just that. Even though, I mean, this is throwaway code, I'm totally conceding that. But it's good to sort of show what good hygiene looks like for this sort of thing, because I've got to set a good example, and it's good to set a good example for myself as well. All right, so where have we got that? Context, localized, translation. We'll put that down here. So we've got that T, just so it's a bit quicker. And we'll go about page dot title. Good. All right, we've got that counter line. I'll just copy that from this one here. And this is not app code. I'm going to get rid of that. And then we've got home. So this is where it can get a little bit weird, because if I'm doing stuff like homepage.title, you can see how that sort of, like, that's going to, I typed that all wrong. That sort of thing is going to mean that possibly stuff that belongs in another context is now, for some reason, going to be in yet another context. What did I do wrong here? Oh, that's good. Cannot find name P. What did I do wrong? What did I type wrong? Can anyone help me? Like, this is correct. Oh wait, no, it's not. That's better. All right. So now if we reload on that about page, you can see a whole bunch of things do not, well, actually everything shows correctly because the about page and then the home page, that's all in there, that's all good. All right. Now, on the author page, almost none of this is home content, however, except for, is app content, except for this little home button just there. So we can do that. We can fix that up. We can grab the context and make use of that on the entry page. So here, this is the article. So article title can stay with the home, the counter. And I'm also reusing keys here, this homepage counter. I'm not too phased about that just because, well, something we've got to do. This article though, we'll certainly update that. So we've got article byline. Oh, hang on, let's not put that. And this is where it actually gets interesting, and maybe I'll handle that case later. So you can see here we've got this link, right? This link. What do we do with this link? Because we have translated content that lives outside and inside that. And that I will save for another episode, because this is not quite so simple. We can't just go, all right, we've got everything we need, let's just plonk a translation function on, because we still want this link to actually point to where we want it to go. So there are things that we need to deal with there. Right, let's do this home. So I'll just grab line 185, put that in line. What happened there? Sorry, I'm just struggling with the computer today. All right, here we go. Right, and then finally the author page, which doesn't already have a context available to it, so I'll have to jam that in there. Weekends, web app context. And all we need to do to throw that one on is we need the same homepage title translation there. And the massive benefit of doing this early rather than doing this late. So you can certainly think of, like, if you were to retroactively go through a massive application with strings that need translating all about, you can see how this could be a laborious process where you have to go through every single thing, namespace them all that sort of thing. And sure, this translation file can get out of hand. It can get with lots of keys, lots of complexity and all that sort of thing. But it's complexity you're tackling a little bit at a time. If you wait to translate your app until your app is successful, you'll never be able to do it fast enough. It'll take forever for you to pull everything out. If you do things right the first time, it's not going to be one of those band-aids that's going to take forever to pull off. You know, like, you're better off to rip band-aid off early in your application development rather than late. And that's what we're trying to do here. So we've started with our just basic translation, basic plurals with that localized context. When we're next back, what we'll do is start to go into the realm of dates and date times, formatting them. And then we'll add some numeric formatting, and that'll pretty much cover our localization system in the early period. That said though, we will deal with that slightly complex case of where we want an actual link inside this content, because that is, I mean, that comes up a lot. You can't dismiss that. And the simple fact of it is every time, in fact, there's another translatable string. Let's put that one right. The simple fact of it is when you are working through literally any code base, there are going to be times when you need like some sort of like bolding or a link or something like that within a larger sentence. And the whole concept of translating by keys is that you can't translate by phraseology. You can't go, all right, every word just needs to be translated with its English equivalent. Okay? There's a reason why, if you want to get good results out of any translation, any translation system, you need to provide it full sentences, okay? Because by James, in several languages, will be the other way around. But I don't know which languages they are. Let's see. Deutsch. Oh, I'm not even going to try. I don't know languages, okay? But the simple fact is you probably don't either. Or if you do, you know particular languages. And there are hundreds of languages. Well, yeah, there's these ones, but then there's also hundreds of languages if you want to get real about it. So there's no way you can possibly know all of them. You want to make your system as ignorant as possible of language, so that then you can localize effectively. The moment you start tying all of your concepts to language, and this goes as far as naming conventions and like how people identify themselves. There are so many ways that you can make your application exclusive to an English-speaking audience, and we want to try and avoid that, because an English-speaking audience isn't the only audience, that's for sure. All right, rant off. I'll finish this one off. Just make sure that it still works, which it does. Very good. And now we will commit all this. So this is our first step into localization. I didn't actually demonstrate what it looks like with other languages, but we can cross that bridge at a later day. Other than that, it pretty much does everything I needed to. If there are any questions, please shoot them at me while I'm doing this last commit message. All right, first steps into internationalizing application with English localization. And I'll jump on out there. I will add a tag for day 15, and we'll push that all up. All right, we are done. So that's about enough for today, and we'll be back tomorrow at 8 p.m. Australian Eastern Standard Time, where we're going to get into the date time side of our localization, internationalization, whatever words you want to use, system. That's it from me. Thanks for watching. See you next time.